Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see so many people logging in, and I know we've got a few more to come still. My name is Steve Keller, and I'm the program developer for Substance, formerly known as Drug Free Kids Canada. Joining me today, I have a co-facilitator, Brianna. Do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself there, Bri?
Hello, my name is Brianna, and I'm Steve's placement student, and I'm a Seneca student studying social service work.
Phenomenal. Today's presentation is going to be a lot of fun. Many of you have seen workshops that we've done in the past here at Substance, often around particular substances, understanding and debunking myths and misconceptions, pointing out signs of potential risk, reducing harm. Today's presentation is a little bit different. You'll notice our tagline on our organization name is to learn about it and talk about it. We spend a lot of time covering content on learning about substance use. Today's presentation is centered around the dialogue, the conversations between parents and youth regarding substance use. Today, we'll be exploring some of our own research from tracking studies we've done over the last number of years into these topics, as well as best practices for adults to encourage non-judgmental dialogue with a focus on positive youth outcomes. Now, you'll notice during the presentation, we will have some live surveys, some trivia going on. Feel free to answer in the chat panel. If you have any questions, feel free to enter them there as well. We will make sure to get to them as we go along. And without any further ado, we will get started. So, what is our vision at Substance? And I often start off our presentations with this exact message. Our vision here is to ensure that young people are able to live their lives free of problematic substance use and addiction. Now, what does it mean to live free? Well, the idea is that we're aiming on a focus towards harm reduction and setting up protective factors to reduce the risk of negative outcomes. We understand that substance use is a choice, which is why we specify the importance of free of problematic substance use and addiction. Many programs in the past focused largely on abstinence-only approaches or normative behavior being entirely focused on non-use. However, we understand that people have the right to choose. They have the agency of choice, and some people may choose to use substances that could cause them harm. And so we as humans, we prioritize and we practice reducing harm on a daily basis. We just don't necessarily know that we're doing it. When we talk about harm reduction, one of the examples that I often talk about is something like riding a bicycle. If you ask a group of youth how many have either rode or currently ride a bike, almost all of them will say they have, but nearly all will also say they've fallen off of that bicycle. An abstinence-only approach would be to say that no one should ever ride bikes because they can get hurt on them. And that's true. But knowing we can be hurt, we wear helmets, we use knee pads and elbow pads, and we check our brakes and use training and safety equipment to reduce the risk of harm. Substance use has practices around harm reduction as well. For instance, we know in 2020, substance use in Canada contributed to over $49 billion in harm, including to our healthcare system, justice system, lost work, and various other expenses. Yet, despite being aware of these harms, abstinence-only approaches would say that no one should ever use. The problem is that's not reality. Despite knowing these costs of harm, we know that 2/3 of adults over the age of 19 consume alcohol, 1 in 9 smoke tobacco daily, 1 in 6 teens report vaping, half of college-age youth cannabis or youth use cannabis, and 12% overall report using opioid pain relievers. Each of the substances I just mentioned carry risk. So we work to minimize those risks by talking about designating sober drivers. If you're smoking, smoking away from non-smokers, or vaping to reduce the amount of carcinogens we consume, opting for lower THC products from cannabis, or only using medications as directed by a healthcare provider. Now, the agenda for today is not so much, like I said, a focus on the research as much as it is the conversations. So we have 4 components to this talk today. First is what substance-related topics matter the most to parents and teens. Here, we're going to be examining some of the survey responses we received during our tracking studies over the past few years. This survey studied several hundred parents and teens across Canada, most recently in 2024, 2022, and 2020, to examine their awareness, their thoughts, and their beliefs about not only substance use, but how much each other know about it. Second, we're going to talk about how can we best approach these difficult conversations. Now, having an idea of what adults and teens know about substance use is one thing. It's important, but equally so is being able to promote open-ended and non-judgmental dialogue. Here at Substance, we pride ourselves on not only showing the evidence to support knowledge, but equally important is how to discuss substance use in a way that does not alienate or stigmatize anyone involved. That's why our slogan, like I said a moment ago, is to know about it and talk about it. Third, we'll discuss what barriers might prevent families from communicating about substance use. Now, here we're going to briefly discuss the role of stigma and the barriers that may prevent youth from seeking supports. But not only that, what barriers may also stop adults from reaching out for help. And that leads into our last component of where can people learn more and find support to help the youth in their lives. At the very end of the presentation, we'll discuss many of the resources and supports that our program offers to Canadians to help expand their knowledge about drug use, mental health, and how we can best support each other in a manner that's befitting to everyone involved. Now, before we get into the research and the content, what we're going to do is we're going to open up a self-guided module that our program recently launched. It's called Real Talks, which is an e-learning module for parents. Now, the Real Talks module is pretty fascinating. So what we're going to be looking at is one of the actual scenarios that are built into this module. Now, a little bit of a background on these. The Real Talks is designed to be a way to build confidence in the conversations for parents and youth. So at Substance, we understand that parents play, one of the most powerful and important roles in shaping a youth's understanding, not just about substance use, but about life itself. That being said, we know these conversations aren't always easy. So what we try to do is provide you with strategies on how to have these conversations. So the Real Talk self-guided module, and you'll see the link is down there in the chat panel, is a great way for you to be able to understand how do I respond in a situation, what sort of approaches can I take, and what sort of perspectives do I need to take into consideration before I even start these conversations. And again, you don't need hours, you don't need an exact script of exactly what to say, but understanding the intent and the messages and why they matter is what these modules focus on. So today, I'm actually going to use one of them as an icebreaker for this presentation. So if you ever want to register for them, you're more than welcome to. They're totally free. I've actually got a registration right here. All it'll ask you for is an email address, that being just so that they have a way for you to be able to keep up to date and track your progress. We'll click submit. I jump right in. So you will see there are a multitude of scenarios in the self-guided module. Things like cannabis paraphernalia, how to respond to peer pressure at a party, how do we have dialogue about a teen being in a car with an impaired driver? What if we see text messages coming up about pills? What can we talk about when it comes to vaping, mixing substances? It's a wide array of topics. Today, what we're going to look at is finding cannabis paraphernalia in your teen's room and how might you respond. So, introduction. You are the parent of a 15-year-old teen who's usually busy with school and after-school commitments, competitive sports, part-time work, tight-knit group of friends. Teen's got a pretty busy life. Now, lately, your teen has seemed a little more withdrawn, spending more time in their room and brushing off conversations with, I'm just tired. You chalk it up to stress, growing independence, and the whirlwind of adolescence. Now, today is a rare, quiet Saturday. With your teen off at practice and the house unusually still, you decide to tackle some long overdue chores, starting with everybody's favorite, getting the laundry caught up. Now, while picking up clothes near the bed, you notice something tucked into an open drawer, a pack of rolling papers and what looks like a cannabis grinder. Now, you weren't expecting this. Did they use it? Is it theirs? How long has this been going on? You may start to feel various emotions, perhaps confusion, worry, anger, maybe even guilt. And you start to wonder, should I have seen this coming? Have I been too hands-off, too trusting, too busy? You know this moment matters, but you're not sure where to begin. You don't want to shut things down, but you're also scared to ignore this. You know there's a conversation that has to be had here. So the question becomes, I'm going to ask the audience what they think. How do you approach your teen about what you found? And here we have 4 choices. I'm going to ask the audience what they would suggest I go with. You could either say, your teen comes home and you say to them, we need to talk. I found these in your room. Are you using drugs? You could say, I'm really concerned about something I found today. Can we talk about it when you have a minute? You can say, I can't believe you do this. You're grounded until further notice. Or you say nothing. ignore it for now. Which one of these options do our audience believe we should go with? Option 1, option 2, option 3, or option 4? I'll give the audience a moment to pump this into the chat panel. I see a vote for option number 2. Number 2. Absolutely. Everyone's going with option 2. I like this. Now, you'll notice that when you actually click on the option, it gives you a response to what this is. We see this approach as being open and calm. Again, it's not the script of exactly what you say. It's the tone and the presence you have. If we checked on any of the others, we could see that we need to talk is direct, but it's confrontational. The idea of being grounded is more punitive, and the idea of saying nothing is avoidant. So let's go with option 2. This is what we've agreed on. Say continue. Team says, what is it? Did you go through my stuff? They're standing in the doorway. They're waiting for an answer that's less defensive. You say next. You say, I did. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invade your space. I was worried. Or, yeah, I did. You live under my roof, so I can go through your things. Why do you have this stuff? What do you think? Option 1, option 2 here. Vote for 1, vote for 1. A lot of people going with number 1. Very good. So let's check out number 1 and see what kind of a response we get here. Now, all right, yeah, all right. Don't freak out. Look, I've tried cannabis a few times, mostly just at parties and stuff. Helps me feel more like myself. I can relax, I can have fun. Now, when you invite dialogue, you're lowering defensiveness. You're not going with a simple yes, no answer. You're not pushing to an immediate judgment. You're acknowledging your own actions. You pointed out, you're right. Hey, I saw this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go through your stuff. You're modeling honesty. You're being upfront. You're not shifting blame on them. You're acknowledging that there was a moment there that maybe a bit of trust got broken, and you want to continue and maintain and rebuild that respect for privacy. So, I appreciate you sharing that with me. I notice you've been a bit quieter lately. What's on your mind? School's getting to me. I feel a little awkward around people. Like, I don't know how to talk to them anymore. So, I get that. I know feeling anxious can be scary. Hey, having a glass of wine used to help me relax. But using cannabis or any substance might actually make your anxiety worse if you start to use it a lot. I have some information on that. Can we talk about it together? When's a good time for you? They say, let me get this homework done. I've got something going on. I'm seeing this person, maybe after dinner, maybe later. Even if the conversation didn't immediately create the conclusion in that moment, it's a starter and it's great work because what you did was you showed empathy, you remained calm, you didn't immediately jump to punishment because you want to hear some perspective. You pointed out the fact we can share some health facts. You made a plan together. Excellent work. Now, these are great ways just to have quick conversations and those quick moments of the approaches to take. Again, your teen is not always going to talk exactly like this. You are not always going to talk exactly like this. It's not the script. It's the message of what these words mean and what they convey. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. Excellent work. Now, back to the topic at hand. What substance-related topics matter most to parents and teens? Now, before we talk about conversation strategies, we're going to identify the things that our own research has shown that families and communities focus on the most when it comes to substance use. Now, the studies that we do in our own tracking surveys at Substance are generally conducted every 2 years, usually in the fall, involving about a 12 to 15-minute questionnaire online for teens, age about 13 to 19, and parents of youth about age 11 to 19. In 2022, we surveyed a combined 1,800 people. In 2024, we surveyed about 1,400 people. So, from the research that we saw, most recently in 2024, my question for the audience, what percentage of parents do you believe report having spoken with their children about drug use at least once in the past 12 months? Is it 15, 31, 54, or 83%? What does our audience think here? Some people saying 15, 15, 15, 54, 54, 31. Surprisingly, it was actually quite a bit higher. Parents have actually reported having a conversation with drugs at least once at about 83% rate, which is fairly positive. Now, in both years, we actually found that youth said there was a similar rate that their parents talked to them about it. They said it was around 81%. So about 4 out of 5 teens and parents have said at some point there was a conversation had about substance use. Now, what that is varied. I'm not saying these were necessarily 5-hour long conferences, but the point was they had a conversation about something, often a concern from the adult expressed when they spoke about drugs with youth. Now, what were those concerns? The most common ones that we saw were managing stress and anxiety and ways to do so. This came in at about 94% of parents surveyed. One of our presentations at Substance actually examines this very topic. We often offer it in the fall. It's called A Strong Start. We look at stress, anxiety, and coping mechanisms because unfortunately, we know there's a correlation between mental health issues and substance use disorder. And in many cases, these are based on the idea that someone begins to cope or try to manage stress with substance use, which can actually make both worse. But more on that in another presentation. Next most common response we saw was the risks of using street drugs or illicit drugs, followed by the risks of vaping, the ways that your child can refuse drugs. Now, it's very interesting. We talk about harm reduction and we talk about ways to reduce negative outcomes. It's worth remembering that abstinence itself is, in fact, a method of harm reduction. These are not opposing concepts. Reducing harm involves not using. But again, some people choose to use. It's also worth noting that 54% of the teens that we surveyed in 2024 and in 2022 said they wished they had strategies on how to turn down an offer of drugs when someone offered them to them. Next most common things they spoke about were the risks of riding with an impaired driver, and the risks of driving while impaired. So again, many of these topics were addressed at least once by over half of the parents who spoke about substance use with their children. What were some of the concerns that came up a little less frequently? Well, these included things like what were the actual concerns if the child was using drugs? These included the risks of using fentanyl-laced drugs. Now, some of our communities, for example, British Columbia in our 2022 booster for the survey, reported this at a higher rate. So where we see substances such as opioids being used at a little bit more of a greater frequency, where we see greater risks of harm or greater instances rather of harm, we tended to see this come up more often. The risks of mixing alcohol and cannabis. We know polysubstance use is generally practiced by about anywhere from 1 in 8 to 1 in 5 Canadians, depending on the age in the survey. And the most common drugs mixed together are alcohol and cannabis. A little bit less frequently still was to discuss the risks of using prescription drugs to get high, which is an important conversation to note because this actually happens more frequently than people realize. And I'm going to show you the numbers about it in just a little while. And finally, while parents maybe spoke about cannabis itself, the least commonly discussed topic that they selected was about THC in cannabis. Now, it's important to remember that tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, is measured in terms of its percentage when you're measuring the potency or the strength of a product. And the higher amounts of THC used expose youth to greater levels of harm. And furthermore, different types of products can contain higher levels of THC, such as edibles, extracts, and vapes, versus dried leaf product, which increases the risk of psychological or mental health issues. Now, our own program, again, offers free workshops all across the country for youth and adults that provide current and evidence-based information about many of these topics. So our role at Substance is to help support families in conversation, whether that's to build off the things they already talked about in the previous slide, or help inform about things they may not be as familiar with, for example, topics we see here. Next question for the audience. Do you believe that parents are more likely to overestimate or underestimate how likely a youth would get into a car with an impaired driver by alcohol or cannabis? What do we think? Overestimate, underestimate, 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 underestimate. Over, under, over. I feel like I'm talking about gambling because we're talking about over, under, but conversation for another day. So the answer is actually overestimate. Parents are actually a little bit more likely to assume that their youth has been in a vehicle with an impaired driver. And we actually saw this at a rate about 2 times higher than what teens were reporting. In our tracking study, we found that a quarter of parents believed that their teens had been in a car operated by an impaired driver. Now, when we asked youth about how frequently this happened, this really only came in at a rate of about 10%. And it's important. It's absolutely important for parents to communicate the harms of substance use before driving, as they're well documented and can be life altering, life endangering, or life threatening, or fatal. But it's also important to focus the conversation not on whether or not it's happened, but on safety. It can help parents reevaluate how to have this conversation. Instead of framing it around the assumption that teens are getting in a vehicle with an impaired driver, they keep the focus preventative and can focus on strategies on how to arrive alive and how to stay sober. Which leads me to a question for the audience. What are some strategies that you think parents can talk about with their teens to help them arrive safely? If your teen is traveling, what are some safe options to ensure they can get there without running into problems? What are some of the things parents can talk about? While our audience is thinking about this, Brianna, I'm going to pick on you here for a moment. What are some of the options that we could also offer for sober travel if we're a parent talking with youth?
I think maybe just having the conversation of carpooling, designating a safe driver. Um, I guess like talking about Uber, taxis, or even saying that you'll go pick them up if they're ever in that circumstance.
Absolutely. And I did see a comment. It was pretty interesting from one of the audience. They said, as teens, this rate of driving with an impaired driver was off the charts. If you look at surveys such as the Canadian Cannabis Survey, the Canadian Student Alcohol and Drug, what you'll notice is rates of people getting in a car with an impaired driver are significantly higher if the passenger also uses substances. In fact, those rates could range anywhere from 2 to 5 times greater, depending on the survey and the year that you looked at it. So one of the factors that does play into youth decision to get in a vehicle with an impaired driver is if they're impaired as well or using as well. So Brianna, I like that you pointed out safe options, ride sharing, taxis, calling the parent if necessary. One of the things that's also important to note is whether or not the individual is using as well. So it's important to have this conversation beforehand. So again, it comes back to that preventive strategy. So one other thing to note was that about 20% of parents that we spoke with also believed that cannabis impaired driving was less harmful than alcohol impaired driving. Now, here in Canada, despite alcohol being consumed at a significantly higher rate overall than cannabis, it is cannabis that actually results in more fatalities and injuries on the road. In fact, THC is the most common single substance found in dead and injured drivers in Canada at a rate greater than alcohol. So any conversation about sober driving is not just about drinking. It's about cannabis. It's about opioids. It's about medication. It's about sedatives. It's about hallucinogens and any substance that changes how we see the world. This next question is not a right or wrong question. It is a question of opinion. So I'd like to ask the audience, do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree that it is okay to allow my teens to drink or smoke at home and to host a party at our house where I can monitor their weed and alcohol use? And this is a question of opinion. There's not a right or wrong answer here. We're going to talk about what the research suggests, but we're going to see what we think here. We see votes for strongly disagree, strongly disagree. Okay, option one, strongly disagrees. So we got our audience leaning a little bit more towards the disagree side. Okay, fair point. What we found in our tracking studies was that about 36% of adults said they strongly disagreed with this statement. 28% said they disagreed. What we found was that about 27% said they agreed and 10% said they strongly agreed. This is a complicated question. And again, I'm not saying that someone is exactly right or exactly wrong, but it leads to an important lesson when it comes to this conversation between parents and teens. Parents and adults, guardians, care providers, educators, anyone who plays a role in youth development has a significant role there. They're often the first relationship that a youth forms. Your family dynamics that are positive, supportive, and focused on building trust and rapport are more likely to result in youth mirroring positive behaviors. In other words, the relationship you have with a youth plays a role in their substance use. And those who have a positive dynamic within their family are more likely to see the youth mirror positive protective behaviors. So if you're someone who drinks alcohol, your choice to designate a sober driver may be more likely to be mirrored by the youth if they love, trust, and have a safer relationship with you. In other words, it's the adage they want to be like you when they grow up. So where we see positive choices tend to be made with positive dynamics. Now, there's another side to this coin. That may sound like I'm saying modeling behavior would mean you should host them for parties. There's a second thing that comes up here that conflicts a little bit with this. If the teen finds that their parent has a relaxed mindset towards substance use, i.e., you can use it in the house, you can have parties, atmospheres that allow, permit, or encourage substance use, which when you permit and acknowledge it, by extension may come across as encouragement, also play a factor in youth substance use choices. If a parent wants to host a party and they make it clear that they're allowing substance use, the youth will be more likely to use this behavior as it's seen as normal. So it may not even be that you're hosting a party and telling them you plan on them using substances. But if you say you allow it, to them, that sounds more permissive, which in essence it is. It's more likely that they're going to do it because they see it as normal. However, this will then expose them to risk even at home, including risks of overconsumption, mixing drugs, taking laced or illicit products, even if the space is, quote, safe for them. So the key takeaway that really comes up here is not whether or not this statement is true or false. It's that families need to be upfront about setting clear boundaries, discussing substance use, the potential harms, and the ways to respond to emergencies and stay safe. The parent, the guardian, the adult in the house is there to provide support, safety, and guidance, but they're also there to include that guidance to point out what risk can look like. So it's not to say that it's an agree or disagree. It's making sure that the focus is on safety first. The tracking study also gathered some rather interesting information on youth in Canada. For example, a third of teens reported that they considered using substances as a coping mechanism for mental health risks in 2024, which was significantly higher than it was in 2022, which was 23%, and 2020, which was 18%. We have seen an increasing amount of reports and rates of mental health disorders. So, unfortunately, as we know there's a correlation between mental health and substance use, it would not be surprising to see that more youth are considering substance use to cope with their mental health. We know that someone's mental well-being can be adversely affected by stress, and youth may consider drug use as a means to overcome or suppress these emotions. Now, the three most common drugs that youth considered using for coping were cannabis at 67%, alcohol at 59%, and prescription and over-the-counter drugs at 33%. You have cannabis, which is legalized and regulated, alcohol, which is legalized and regulated, and prescription drugs, which are legalized and regulated. So again, the three most common substances that were coming up were not illegal drugs. They were substances that were regulated. Next up. 3/4 of teens who said they don't use drugs, when asked why they didn't use drugs, reported that this was due to not wanting to make their parent or guardian worry. Now, this is a great reminder for parents that being willing to express concerns, being clear and honest, and keeping an open communication with your teen is helpful in reminding them that their substance use choice affects everyone around them, not just themselves. Teens listen to their family, even if it feels like they don't, even if they roll their eyes, even if it seems like they're not paying attention. Statistically, we know that they are. I mentioned this earlier. Half of kids said they wish they had better strategies on how to say no when someone offered them substance use, which again points out the importance for youth to consider how they're viewed by others. It can be hard for teens to think of ways to say no or to reject an advance on their own. So we're going to discuss ways that adults can help teens respond and prepare themselves for these difficult conversations. And finally, 1 in 5 teens who use substances reported that someone within their circle of friends has had a bad experience with drugs, including hospitalization. Now, to learn more about the risks and harms of substance use, which we explore in greater depth throughout our program, You can visit our website at talksubstance.org. Huh. A lot of stuff to comb through. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to be turning over the mic to my colleague Brianna to look at how can we best approach difficult conversations about substance use. Take it away, Brianna.
Thank you. Well, it's always important to communicate with your family as parents, grandparents, guardians, or trusted adults. Having an open conversation early on in a child's life can help build their trust, confidence, and resilience as they grow. Discussing together helps create a climate in which your child feels free and comfortable to talk with you about what's happening in their lives and can make it easier to talk together about the bigger issue like substance use. Now, I'll ask you guys a question. Which of the following sources of information do teens report trusting the most to provide reliable information about substance use? Would it be parents, school, social media, or friends? Okay, I'm saying parents, friends. Okay, so it's easy to say that we think that teens have a closer relationship with parents and friends, so that's why they would be more reliable. And the answer is actually parents with the 67%. This has been a constant amongst teens in our last 3 tracking surveys, which shows that even as time changes, youth still ultimately trust their parents and school before anything else when it comes to getting reliable information. Okay, so now we're going to get to conversation strategies, one of them being prepare yourself to talk effectively. So you should stay calm, put yourself in their shoes, keep an open mind, set boundaries, and set goals. If you want to talk to your teen about substance use, you should always prepare yourself first. Be mindful of your emotions and try to stay calm, as anger can come off as judgment or resentment, which can make it harder to connect with your teen. Try seeing it from their perspective and lead with empathy, as you want to keep the conversation open, judgment-free. When it comes to establishing goals or boundaries, it's important to ensure that there's a mutual understanding. Keep in mind that this is a conversation, not a lecture, so make sure both of you are comfortable. Gauge their feelings about substance use, be positive, express concerns and compassion, research the effects of substance use together with your teen. Make sure you understand their feelings regarding substance use. Maintain a positive attitude and mindset when having this conversation, as it creates a safer space. Understand the importance of expressing your concerns and worries. It shows you care. A great thing to do with your teen is to research the effects of substances together, as it shows that you guys are in this together. Be honest about your own use of substances. Don't lecture, engage. Find a comfortable setting. Be aware of your body language. It's okay to take a break or pause if things get heated. It's okay to ask others for help. Be honest with your own substance use, as it can allow your teen to feel understood, but don't overshare. This is a conversation where both of you should be equally engaged, so make sure it doesn't become a lecture, as it can cause your teen to close off. Finding a setting that feels comfortable is always important, as it makes the conversation more welcoming and natural. Be aware of your body language, as teens can pick up on it. So be conscious about that. So I did mention body language. So I do want to ask the audience, what might be some indicators that either you or your teen are feeling uncomfortable in this conversation regarding body language? So this can go for parents and teens. Steve, do you want to add?
Yeah, while the audience is posting up some responses there, the first one I always kind of think of is that idea of like folding your arms and asking kind of those yes no questions, right? Like you're closing your body off, you're sort of not really showing a sense of comfort, you're looking rigid, and you're trying to ask questions that are just not giving them a chance to answer. They're just allowing you to continue talking.
Yeah, 100%. For parents, I think it can come off as like you're being like very authoritative. One of the main things to point out is if kind of like you're standing in the doorway of the room and you're having this conversation, teens can kind of take that as you're cornering them to have this conversation, and it's taking away the option of having that conversation for teens. I think for teens, a big indicator if they're getting really uncomfortable is if they're folding their knees in front of them, they're putting something between you and them, they're not having stable eye contact with you, or they're only answering yes or no. A big indicator is if a teen puts something between you and them, because that kind of shows that they're kind of separating themselves from you and the conversation, which can indicate that they're getting uncomfortable and they don't want to have some conversation. So it's important to know that both of you have the option to pause the conversation and resume when you guys are in a safer space.
Absolutely. I also see a lot of people talking about that idea of like a lack of eye contact, the glaring, the kind of standing physically over them too. Great answer.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll move on to active listening. So a good thing to think about is trying to ask open-ended questions, be positive, let your child know that you hear them, sum up and ask questions, ask permission, and offer empathy and compassion. When having a conversation with your teen, it's important to practice active listening, as it allows for an open conversation and helps build trust. A good way to show that is by giving someone your undivided attention. And that is shown by reflecting and summarizing their thoughts. Make sure you ask for permission to when wanting to provide feedback and respond with empathy. Now, I did mention two important things here that I do want to ask the audience. So I mentioned open-ended question. So what would you guys might think is an open-ended question? How would you describe that? You guys can put that down in the chat box. While that's happening, Steve, do you kind of want to add in? I'm picking on you today.
That's okay. You asked me an open-ended question and then you asked me a closed one, which was great.
Yeah.
So I like Corinne put, no, yes, and no. And that's the, do you know is the closed-ended question. And the
Mhm.
first one that you asked was, if anyone could explain to you what it is. Exactly. People are talking about, tell me more, shouldn't lead to yes or no. Why do open-ended questions matter for that reason, Brianna? What do they do?
Well, because it can foster a conversation. Open-ended questions are things where you can add things that aren't just yes or no. So when having this conversation with the team, you're giving them the option to have a conversation with you in depth, which is why it's really important to know how to ask these questions. Another thing that I mentioned was empathy. And I think a lot of times we get confused with empathy and sympathy. It's important to know the difference when having these conversations with teens. So I do want to ask the audience, if you know the difference between sympathy and empathy, and what would that be? And while that's happening again, Steve, sorry for picking on you.
Oh, I won't hold it against you. Um, Sympathy, I always kind of describe as when you say, like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Someone's had a bad day. It's like, it could be worse. Nah,
Mhm.
that's sympathy. You're trying to show you care, but it doesn't always come across that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
I like the response there from the chat. Sympathy is feeling sorry for them. Empathy is walking in their shoes. I love that. Really coming back to the idea of putting themselves in someone's shoes.
100%. Empathy is, yeah, just essentially putting yourself in their shoes, seeing them where they're at, and trying your best to really offer support. I guess a great example that you can say when you're having a conversation regarding substance use could be, I hear that you're smoking pot, helps your anxiety. I'm sorry that you're feeling anxious. I know that that's a difficult feeling, and I'm here to support you. And we can think about activities that can help you relax. You're showing that you understand them, you're seeing them where they're at, and you're offering support. So it's really important to understand the difference.
Absolutely. So one of the next slides, I always like the slide. I use the slide in a lot of our presentations. It's sort of words that we want to try to avoid saying in favor of others. Now, understanding
100%.
the impact of certain words that we use on a daily basis and how they're received can really help improve our communication. So we have a list of words here on the left. You started a conversation with someone. It's, hey, I'm glad you got a sober ride home last night, but why did you have to drink so much in the first place? Well, instead of saying but, try to frame your conversation around the word and, right? Instead of
Mhm.
saying, but you drank so much last night, it's like, and what are you up to today? What's the difference between a sentence that starts with but and a sentence that starts with and, Brianna?
Well, how I like to see it is I think it takes, when you're using but, it takes away from the person's achievements or their strengths in the sentence. So, like Steve kind of mentioned, hey, I saw that you got a sober ride, but you drank a lot yesterday. You're taking away from the fact that they were able to get a sober ride. You're kind of dismissing them. Um, and invalidating them. But when you're using and, you're combining their strengths and your worries and concerns.
Absolutely. Now, words should, right? You ever try to tell a kid, you should do something? Never works, right? Because they just kind of do the opposite. So instead of saying should, Brianna, what word might be a little more effective in those conversations?
Would like. When you use the word should in a conversation with a teen, or you're saying you should do this, you're taking away the option of control for them. But when you're using would like, it's kind of becoming collaborative. Yeah, I would like you to do this. You're giving them the option.
Absolutely. Now, often when we talk about substance use, we say like smoking's bad for you, or using cocaine is stupid, or drinking all the time is stupid, right?
Mhm.
Those words create a lot of judgment. So, what words could you say instead of bad or stupid when discussing substance use?
A great word to use is harmful or unhealthy because it shows concern as well, and it's more in a factual term instead of using bad or stupid that can further stigmatize the person.
Absolutely. And then the last couple that we have are things like disapproval and disappointment. I'm sure many people in our audience have either heard these words, either said to them or said to someone else.
Mhm.
If I were to say to you, Brianna, that I disapprove of your friends, are you just going to change your friends because I tell you I disapprove of them?
Absolutely not.
No,
I
no, you don't
wouldn't.
owe that to me. But what emotion am I feeling under that disapproval? Why do you think I disapprove of them?
Well, you can be concerned and worried. That's mainly the reason why we say these words. But we have to understand how this can make the other person feel and how negatively impactful these words are. So instead of saying disapprove or disappointed, it's just better to say concerned and worried. Be honest and let them know that you're worried because it shows that you're there to support them.
100%.
So having the conversation with the whole family. It's crucial to understand how important it is to create a safe space to facilitate these conversations. Set clear expectations and boundaries with everyone involved in the conversation. Make sure the conversations are age appropriate and discuss the health risk and consequences of substance use without using scare tactics. Create a goal and positive outcomes that are attainable. Make sure everyone is comfortable and try getting everybody involved in positive activities. So for parents of young children and preteens, set safety rules, ensure that your kid knows the consequences to their health, as well as ramifications for breaking rules. So as parents, we want to support and protect all our children from any potential harm. Younger kids look up to their older siblings. Be sure to include them in the family safety conversations about substance use. So for parents and preteens, nurture their self-confidence and resilience, encourage extracurricular activities, and provide a safe, loving, supportive home. Younger brothers and sisters can hero-ship their older siblings and may try to follow their footsteps, copying everything that their big brothers or sister does. When it comes to doing something potentially harmful, like using substances, that's why it's important to include the entire family in the conversation you have you have about substance use and the harms that early drug use can cause to the mental health and physical health of your kids. So parents of older teens and young adults maintain open and honest dialogue about substance use. If they are an older sibling, remind them of their role as a model for the younger siblings and examine how low risk substance use guidelines and examine low risk substance use guidelines together. So notes for adults who have used substances. When it comes to considering what to share, what not to share about your substance use, remember everyone's situation is different. Be honest, more importantly, do not lie because teens can pick up on that. Focus on your safety and well being. If you stopped using, share what you learned and why you stopped, and consider your own use of substances. Lived experience can strengthen this conversation with your teen as long as you're able to shift their focus on the future instead of the past. Knowing how to be honest but still not overshare can be helpful, and understand to share based on your child's maturity. Make sure you communicate your concerns and expectations without it coming off as confrontation. Coping strategies, health risks, and mental health should be brought up in the conversation, but without using scare tactics. Now, tips for parents and guardians. Spend time together as a family. Praise and reward good behavior. Check in with your teen and stay updated. And remind your child that you support them no matter what. Educating yourself on substances you think your teen might encounter. It's okay not to know everything, as everything is constantly evolving. Maintain conversations about your teen's mental health and possible risk. Set some clear guidelines while reinforcing positive behaviors. Start having check-ins with your teen and try learning more about them and who they surround themselves with. Focus on positives and strengths, and overall make sure your team knows that you're there to support them.
Absolutely. Phenomenal, Brianna. That was awesome. Did she do a great job? I love that. It's good stuff. We're down to the very last kind of component of the presentation. We got about 5 minutes left, and then we're going to wrap up. So, one of the last couple questions I want to ask the audience is what percentage of parents do you believe would not tell someone if their child was experiencing a mental health problem? This, according to the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Do you believe it's 20%, 30%, 40%, or 60%? What does our audience think here? 40, 60, 30, 60, 30. I feel like I'm playing like, Price is Right. They're all throwing the different numbers out here. A few votes for 40, a few votes for 60. The answer is about 40%, and the reasons for that are quite varied. There are many barriers that exist across Canada and around the world when it comes to accessing supports for mental health and substance use services. The first one, anyone who works in the sector knows this. It's long wait times. Our sector is overburdened when it comes to health concerns, physical health, mental health, psychological health. Our sector is overburdened when we look at substance use disorders and risks and harms associated with substance use. Those extensive wait times can make it absolutely feel impossible to get support. I've worked with communities whereby providers will say to me, if a youth is trying to access counseling services, it can be 18 months, it can be 24 months, it can be 30 months. Imagine being 16 years old, living with a mental health issue, and finding out that you're not going to get any support until you're 19 years old. How's that going to help anybody? So wait times can be a significant issue. Second, we have the idea of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling uncomfortable. We have these issues, these things we're going through, but we don't know what to talk about. Limited choices and appointment hours. These can be particularly issues for smaller communities, rural communities, whereby the options and the providers are limited for the scope of what's going on in the community. It could be the fear of what others think and the fear of being misunderstood or dismissed. There are many factors that could prevent us from reaching out, and many of those come around that idea of stigma, the negative thoughts or associations that we link to something like our mental health or our financial situation or our personal background, or the choices we make in life, or the substances that we use or don't use. And that fear of being misunderstood or that fear of being judged can lead many people to not seek support. And for parents, 2 in 5 would not actually seek support if their child was experiencing a mental health problem. Any of these factors play in. So the very last thought I'm going to leave you with here at Substance is this. How many youth and parents report that they know where to find reliable information about drugs in Canada? If there's all these barriers, do they even know where to look? What do we think? About a quarter, a third, half? What do we think here? Got some votes coming in for third, a quarter, a third. People looking at the lower end of the spectrum. You would actually be correct. Now, about in our last couple tracking surveys, we found 34% of the parents that we surveyed said that it could actually name resources to learn more about substance use. For youth, it was about 32%. So the number was pretty close, which is good to know there's a similar level of understanding. But what we want to call attention to is one of our resources offered on our website called the Parent Support Hub. The Parent Support Hub is a free 24/7 online and phone support service powered by and supported through TELUS Mental Health, designated to assist parents, guardians, and families who are concerned about the substance use of a young person in their life. This service is an important part of our mission. It's a major partnership with TELUS Health, which offers a free safe space where parents, guardians, and families can get guidance and support regarding their child's substance use. It is confidential and non-judgmental to get the support, which helps to reduce those feelings of shame and isolation. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which takes away that limited sort of appointment time and availability. And one of the beauties about it is that the access and the support that someone can get from a care provider can connect them with a mental health professional for up to 5 free counseling sessions with very little, or in some cases almost no, wait time whatsoever. It provides brief intervention support for families to be able to get the resources, the knowledge, and sort of the insulation that they need while waiting for those more permanent and local solutions. And if you need help, it's very easy to access. You can call the line at 1-866-381-1511. You can visit our website at talksubstance.org. And when you check out the Parent Support Hub, you can click the live chat now button. Now, with all that in mind, I do want to take a moment as we are coming up on 12:50. We wanted to make sure we were done within the hour. We'd like you to take a moment to please complete the anonymous post-workshop survey that we have. The last thing I wanted to know is if anybody had any questions or comments during the presentation. I'm also going to pop the post-workshop survey into the chat panel right here. But we want to thank you for joining us today. For kids who have a family history of addiction where substance use is arguably greater, is it effective to talk to them about the genetic predisposition? It is worth noting that we know that a family history of substance use may be a risk factor towards substance use, particularly harmful substance use. So having that understanding that it exists in a family's background is important, but what's equally important is helping them focus on how they can make healthier choices themselves. If we know that that family history is a risk factor, then a protective factor is focusing on what we can do in the present and what we can do moving forward. You can point it out, but what I would try to keep the focus on is if we know this is in their past, what can we do to support their future? What sort of programming can we get them into, whether that's intramural programs, after school programs, sporting? What are they doing for their coping mechanisms to deal with the stress and anxiety in their life? If they're being affected with some form of a health concern, are they communicating with their healthcare provider, and where are they getting the information they need on safer consumption if they're choosing to use? And furthermore, if you're unsure of exactly how to frame that conversation, you can always reach out to the Parent Support Hub because they do offer some great advice there. Did I miss anything there, Brianna? Anything you'd add?
No.
I
I think
good.
you worded it perfectly. I think you worded it perfectly.
I'm glad to hear that.
And I hope the audience can gather the information and it's beneficial for them.
Absolutely. I agree completely. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Is there an information brochure available to give to parents? Susan, I believe you're actually going to be sending out a brochure and flyer after the presentation. Is that correct? She is, yeah. It'll be on the follow-up for the yeah, there's a thumbs up. It'll be coming along as a follow-up to the presentation. Otherwise, I am going to be ending the recording here. You are welcome to stay on the call for a few minutes if you have any other questions or comments that you'd like to let us know. But I would like to thank you all for joining us today. It was a wonderful time having you. Brianna, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Take care and enjoy your day.